Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be GRT, aka Garett Bambrough, who is a Canadian veteran Counter-Strike player going way back in the day. So actually, here's the thing. We'll just start there because technically,
sure.
I mean, I actually started at the beginning of Counter-Strike. So the funny thing is, to me, you were like the newer school people that came along a few years later and then got to the pro scene, like, you know, sort of 2005, 2006 sort of era. So one thing I would actually ask you is, I've always wondered if people came into the scene, what did CS esports seem like when it was like somewhat established and, you know, there was a hierarchy and there was the teams and so on? What did it seem like when you come in as a beginner? Did it actually seem glamorous? Did it seem cool? What was it like?
That's actually that's actually a great question. Well, when I came in, I'm starting to reminisce now really hard. When I came in, the first thing I was asking people, I'm like, when I found out there was like leagues, I couldn't believe it. I was like shocked. And they're like, you know, there's this one league that's just like the highest level. If you make this league, then you're at the top. And it was Cal-I at the time, right? So Cal-I was like, if you got there, and I'm like, cool. I'm like, well, how the hell did you do that? And it's like, oh, you got to play through these levels. At the time, it was only Cal-O, Cal Open, and Cal Main, and then Cal-I. So I'm like, okay, cool. Then I didn't know what I was doing. I had to try to find a team, but like the allure was like, oh, because my background, like I was always a competitive hockey player for like a high level for hockey, and I was always like, I just wanted to win all the time. I wanted to compete, and I'm like, well, I don't want to be in Cal-O. That's just like dumb. Like I want to how do I get to this point? And I was trying to find I found those tournaments in Toronto. There was Canadian, professional teams that played in Cal-I, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That's where I want to be. And so it wasn't like a glamorous thing in terms of like it had nothing to do with money. It was just pure, almost like status of like I want to be at the top. So it was alluring to me, but to most people, it was. Yeah, everyone wanted to be in Cal-I. That was the main thing. Yeah, so it was very interesting. And then you find out about CPL, and you're like, wait, this is a thing? Like this is people from around the world play, and it's twice a year. And where is it? Texas? Like okay, so when I first found that out, it was just like a explosion in your mind of like this is a thing. Gaming isn't just like jumping on your N64 and playing. Like Mario, I can do this competitively. I'm like, okay, well, when I'm not playing hockey and I'm not training for hockey, this is what I'm doing. And then fast forward, like 15 years, when I end up like being done, when I was able to get my nights back, like you know what I mean, when like you didn't have practice in either hockey or Counter-Strike, I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I remember that moment in college. I was like, I'm lost. So and it felt like lonely almost, right? Because it's like you spend your whole life building up to, with your friends and gaming for over a decade. That when it was done, it felt like you just got shot.
By the way, one thing you're pointing out there, obviously we'll talk about some of the teams, but just to skip ahead in one of the themes is another thing that's cool when, like you say, you find out there's the CPL. I mean, I can give you my own example. When I found out there was these events in America, and that's like the World Championship. Well, I came from the UK, and this was a time when there wasn't much like money to send people. So, for example, that really was my goal as a journalist. I wanted to work for a site that would pick me as one of the two people that would get to fly over there and do the interviews and take the pictures. So that was a big deal for you journalists. So I imagine, if you're at the amateur level or the semi-pro level, you just go into the Toronto LANs, even the idea of like, I want to be on a team that goes to that CPL and forget like, just go, I want to be on a team that plays, SK or so. That's a dream, right? Yeah.
So like my goals, like when I was in Counter-Strike, from like when I first found out that this was a thing, I had incremental goals, right? And one of the goals obviously was I want to go to one of those events, right? Especially as a Canadian player, we had, kind of like what you said, you're trying to find the websites I want to send to people. Being a Canadian back then, especially the cost of travel,
of course,
was crazy to the point where Americans didn't want you on their team, because you would cost more if you wanted to go to these events. So when trying to find a team and try to make Cal-I, and then the team that you want to make Cal-I with, are they going to go to the event? Because we weren't paid.
Yes.
It was like, do you guys want to spend your own money to go? And then I was fortunate that when I found teams that could go, like I was always paid for to go. So I never had to use my own money for it. So I was I was fortunate, but like the amount of Canadians that would actually go to the event was very limited. It was EG, and then maybe like DeadZone would go if they, maybe Eco East Coast Offensive would go, or 2D would go. I think once or twice. Like it was
I mean, even then, I'm going to guess some of those teams probably didn't even fly. They probably just take like a car and drive down or something, or some crazy shit like that. Maybe even.
I honestly, I don't know. It could have been. I do know that the drive was like 28 hours or something, something like that. Because like I know that number roughly because that was always the thought of like, okay, well, if you fly at that time, it was like almost $2,000.
Yeah, it was way more expensive back then. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, like $2,000. Well, now if I want to go to Texas, I fucking $500 maybe.
They didn't have the low cost airlines back then. If kids don't know, like it was just it was quite expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just couldn't go. So it was like. So it was more of like this. The way I thought of CPL was, it was more of like a perk. Right. It was like the goal of was
the reward. Exactly. Get
the Cal I was the main thing. But like if I got to go to CPL, I'm like that would be like shit. Like this is a real thing. And I remember the first one I went to was we went to the Gaylord Hotel, and like I remember walking in. It was my first time in Texas, and I was just like. And I would see like there was like alligators, like the ponds, like in the pathway you'd walk by. I'm like, what the fuck?
You thought you were in another world or something, right?
Yeah, because like again, I'm Canadian and I'm going to like
Texas.
Where like I couldn't breathe the air.
No, it was so hot and humid, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember the one grave mistake I made when I was there was a gas station. I know you've been there before, but like I'm not sure if you remember the gas station. But like there's a gas station you could go to, and I'm like, okay, I want to buy some things. I'm gonna walk there.
Oh, and like insane, it was like you die. Even at night, it's really hot. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is before like you had like cell phones and stuff where you could check how far is the guy.
How far was
it? I asked the clerk. I'm like, where's the gas station? It was like, oh, and there's no Uber, right? So it was like, oh, it's a 15-minute walk or whatever. It wasn't, and I walked. And I just remember just being just absolutely drenched in the heat. To the point when I got the things, I'm like, "Fuck this! I'm buying a cab," and I bought a cab to go back, and it was just I just remember like it was awful. It was absolutely awful, the heat and everything. But still, though, I just remember going down the escalator
glorious, isn't it? When you know you're there, and you see the people.
Mm-hmm. It's like I remember I went down the escalator and I would see all the people with their computers waiting in line. I'm like, "Fucking it was like this is it. This is it," and I'm like, I felt like. Inadequate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like this.
No, Bit, you're touching on something that's key that I want to ask you about, which is this is the other thing people don't get. Yeah, back then it wasn't famous. People outside of our super niche community, which was tiny, didn't know anything about this. They didn't even know it existed. In fact, when you'd be at that CPL, when you were in the venue, you'd have people who were from like a different conference. Like, what are you guys here for now? And you're like, they had no fucking clue. They were here from, I don't know, fucking Avon or something stupid like that, So the way, like you're saying though, that's why it was cool to go though, because even if you went and you came last, you felt like I'm in the fucking secret club. Holy shit.
I feel like I hate always talking about being like the old person now where it's like back in my day and all that crap, but like a lot of gaming has lost that.
Yes.
Where just the feeling of when I went to so I was competitive, I wanted to win all the time, right? But when I went to CPL, I wasn't under any delusions. I went to CPL knowing I'm about to get my shit kicked in, right? And so I went there because it was just the experience of seeing hundreds or I don't know how many people it was. Fuck it, was it 1,000, 2,000? I don't know what it was.
There's loads in the BYOC. It was loads, wasn't there?
Yeah, like there tons of people there just trying to go there to just for the opportunity to have fun, and compete, and just going there and just that it was that feeling. It's lost a lot of that. Where, I remember vividly the only one I've thought of recently since then. Of an event I've gone to, not as a competitor, just as working with the Knights, and when I had teams that we compete under us, I went to a Halo event when the game launched.
All right,
it was like their first event was a Halo, and I don't know where it was, dude. I try to forget the Halo stuff. It was like Raleigh maybe.
Oh, right, North Carolina. Okay.
Yeah, I think, and then I think that's where we were.
It sounds about right. I know a lot of the like MLG console games were in like actually sort of like those small areas, right?
Yeah, but they had that area, which it wasn't CPL size.
Ah, right.
You know what I mean? But
it was cool to see another one of those where people bring all the boxes.
Yeah, we're like they had like over 100 teams just competing to try to get in, the slot to be in the main event. And I'm like, great. I'm like. 90% of these teams know they're going to get destroyed.
No, of course.
Right, but people flew in, they drove in. I'm like, this is That's like that
Yes.
reminded me of like so. Like, that
I know
was
what you
nice
mean. If you
to
go
me.
to an esports event now, it's like, the 16 teams invited, their managers, and there's no amateur element. Like you say, there's people going there on a hope and a prayer that they miraculously qualify and just going to lose last place anyway. Like, it's kind of like, it wasn't kind of a crazy dream, right?
Yeah, and then the fun thing is always like the stories that happen from it, where like upsets are made, and you're like, wait, what?
Legendary
what
shit,
happened?
Yeah.
Like I was a part of one.
I'm going to talk about that later. Don't worry, but we'll get to that one. You had a mega one, yes.
But like just like that thought of like that anything could happen.
Yes.
Especially, it's just that was a part of the beauty of what I loved about esports back then.
Yes.
And now like a lot of it's like, if I'm being honest, I know so. I hope I don't offend people from Counter-Strike, but like Counter-Strike's obviously in my blood, but a lot of time like I can barely watch it now. Where like it's just the same teams over and over again.
It's true. It's a bit like sports now. Yeah, true.
Yeah, which like I don't like. I get it, right? I love following the storylines of the teams and like how they have the ups and downs and so on. But like I do miss the where's the randos that come out of no like I'm forgetting the name. I know you'll be able to get it. The team Russians came out of nowhere. Now they're more popular now. Oh my God!
Team Spirit.
Yes. Like at the time, I think was like they went on a huge run, and they were beating everyone, and people were like, what is happening? Like that is the things that I loved the most. Was like then you're just like I don't know who these guys are, but yes, whoever you are, keep beating them up, right? Yes. And then they always get plucked apart later on, but like it's seeing those runs were what I love the most about the CPLs and the things that could happen of like like when. The one that I remember a lot of too, again, it's biased because I'm Canadian, was when it was flawed though. I know you'll know this, but a lot of people might not know, but when the CPL, the EG faced SK in the finals and they were second.
Yes.
Like that was also, it was a watered down CPL because there was.
But the finals were still good. It was because the ESWC was going on in Europe at the time.
Yeah. So like it wasn't as strong as the other ones, but I just remember like EG getting there and you're like, all right, shit, yay, that's great. But then the finals was great to watch. But I just remember, like, and I looked at like the top 16 teams because I think my team that I played for was in it. Yeah. And it was like, yay. But I was also like, I'm not. Again, I know, right? I'm like,
okay.
I think I think it was DeadZone I was with, and I think we got 9th to 12th or 13th or 16th.
Oh, something like. But it depends which one.
Was that what it was? Whatever it was, I just remember being like. Yeah, it's like a lot of the European heavy hitters, which is what you compared yourself to. Sure. They weren't there, but obviously SK was one of
the best teams in the world.
At the time, they were that was it, right?
Yes.
So I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point.
No, it's all good. Right,
I miss those feelings of like the open.
Yes. Oh, it was definitely a different atmosphere. And as you say, especially because back then, remember, people didn't have smartphones. There wasn't like news website. Even the news website would have taken time to update. So what would happen, like you're saying, well, don't worry, I'll definitely get to that upset. That's one of the things I want to ask you. But when an upset like that would happen, it's like you're saying, first of all, an upset could happen with players you've never heard of, especially if they've never been to the LANs. Like, it might just be some alien. Say, who the fuck's that? And then also, when the upset would happen, it wasn't like we were all on a massive stage. You just hear it like, oh my God, this team just lost.
Oh, yeah.
And they would just go around and everyone, what? And then all of a sudden, everyone thinking about the bracket. Does that mean we can be in that game? Does that mean we can go? Oh,
it ruined the bracket every time.
The excitement was crazy though, right?
The brackets are preset, right? So it wasn't reseeding or anything like that. So when you did that, like the team that we played after that episode, whenever
they were obviously licking their chops,
when we went, like they're just like, they just got a gift.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yes.
So like they're thinking, and I'm like, okay, well, I think now I'm trying. We have to try to make this happen again, right?
Yeah,
like,
of course.
But yeah, like I love that when upsets happen because the brackets would get butchered, and then like, a part of the competitive aspect of it was also like, well, then it's like now damn, like this team's gonna have an easier path, and like these two juggernauts have to face in the bottom part of the bracket, and it's like. Well, that's just the way it was.
That was just the vibe back then. Yes.
There was no complaint. I don't remember anyone complaining.
You just got on with it. Yeah.
Like you just knew it was like shit. We got unlucky with that seeding or bracketing. Yes. But whatever. It wasn't like nowadays. Like when we run events with with our company. Oh man, if the format isn't like pristine and in the pro team's favor, we get butchered every time.
Sure.
And I'm just like I make it as competitive as possible. I'm like, dude, like Yeah, that's another thing for another time. Maybe.
I've got a question for you about the hockey thing, because I actually did know this. Like, look, I realise in Canada, they just put you on a pair of skates when you're 3. Everyone played hockey. But the ones who actually kept playing and didn't just play in school or the little league type thing, the ones who tried to play pro or like at school level or something like that, I noticed actually there's a trend in general in esports, if you notice. If you ever listen to European players, almost all the best players have a story where it's like, oh, I broke my leg playing football, so I had to sit indoors. I started playing this game called CS, and then, they're a pro 2 years later. And what I think people miss is this. It's not actually, in my opinion, about like talent, the idea they were good at a sport. In my opinion, actually what sets them apart is, right, they're essentially actually the jock guy. They're the guy who plays sports. The normal guy who's just the nerd online, who's just good in aiming, I actually do think that guy, look, he can take it or leave it. It's fun to be good. It's, be nice to win. I actually think the people who come from like a sports background, they know how to practice. They understand discipline. They understand ideas like how to be in a team, right? These are key concepts. Like you're saying, if I talk about your story, you go step by step up the competitive ladder. Like, obviously, spoiler if people don't know your history. At the end of 1.6, when you get to pandemic, that was actually fucking fire. That was like a very good team that could actually compete, could actually be. But if you hadn't have been someone who practiced, or you didn't like look for the right opportunity to move teams, I mean, they're Canadians. Some of those just stayed in the same team, like the EG guys. They kind of just chilled. I know that Stevenson guy could have gone to 3D a million times, mate. So some people didn't have it. They didn't have the killer mindset of like, I want to be good. Were you a guy who was a grinder like that?
Yes. So I unfortunately, as a player, because that competitive mindset of me, I had like little to no loyalty.
Yeah, because you want to move up. You want to move up. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but the thing was, you had with the Canadian scene how it was, you had to do that, or else you wanted to be stuck where you were. And I hated politics when it came to playing, and the Canadian scene was all politics.
Yeah. It was all cliques and shit like that, yeah.
And I refused to be a part of it. I used them to get to what I needed.
Right.
And then the first opportunity I got, I was out. I left immediately.
Okay.
But yeah, like the competitive, like we can get that in a second. But like the hockey and the athlete part of it, yes, like that, being able to take criticism and not be too down when you lose, and how it's just natural to lose, that sets you on another path, right? Where it's like, it obviously sucks to lose, but I'm not devastated to the point where I can't continue going. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm pissed. I want to win. Don't get me wrong, right? But like, then you watch your demos and you look at what happened, what went wrong, and how you can improve and try to move on. But I found that even like nowadays, when I was either coaching or when I was having our own teams that I would have to recruit that had nothing to do with Counter-Strike or like Rocket League or whatever, I always found that the people that came from the sports background, not because of the athletics and all that crap. Like, I'm not talking about like physically. I'm talking just being around the coaches and how they would treat you and so on, that they were just mentally tougher. Right. But then there was also the wild flip side of the ones who like didn't come from that, who have these nerves of steel that you're like, how is this a thing?
There were some just aliens, weren't they? Yeah, just clutching everything.
It was like, you have the athletes that like were just strong as hell mentally. Then you have the people that had nothing to do with it, but just didn't have a care in the world, that wouldn't be bothered by anything on the other side. And then the ones in the middle were the ones that would struggle.
Yes.
And yeah, so in hockey, like that's how it is. It's kind of like what you mentioned. So I trained and played hockey, and then when I wasn't doing that, I was playing Counter-Strike. And then, when I did, with the time available, you did as best you could. I had my own teams and so on. And it got to the point where I had a severe injury with my shoulder, and and then my James, who's the owner of the Knights, GB James, who's been a friend of mine for a long time. I was on his team, and I quit at that time. I quit his team because I was focusing on hockey. Like, I'd made that decision. I'm like, it was at the age where you had to decide, am I going to go overseas and play? Am I going to go for a scholarship and play? Like, what am I going to do? And it was at that stage where I'm like, I need to stop and I need to focus on just this. And then he teases me to this day. Within 2 weeks after doing that and quitting his team, I had a shoulder injury where my arm just went limp.
Right.
And I couldn't lift up my arm for months. And I had a shower holding my arm above my head, and we went to doctors. No one could figure it out. Eventually, an English doctor who did advanced sports medicine in Toronto looked at me like years later, and we found out what it was. But at the time, we didn't know what it was. I couldn't play anymore, so I was done hockey for months. And then after that happened, within 2 weeks after that, that's when pandemic reached out to me. And
right.
then, but like the whole thing stems from it. The big jump for me came from hockey when I got injured, and kind of like what you said, it went from there. Once the injury happened, and the switch in my head went, well, now I'm focusing on this. Right. And not knowing that this was not about money either. It was just like, I need my competitive fix. So I'm going to do this. And then that's when I joined pandemic. But yeah, it all stemmed from an injury and the sports attitude of just like being able to be berated and being able to work with people and not take it personally. Where the best story I always tell people now is like my whole life, I trained as a right winger in hockey. And that's my whole life, everything. That was it. And then when I was in college, I was playing for my college team, where the coach was a scout for the Maple Leafs. And we had a tournament, and we went on the bus afterwards. And in front of everyone, he asked me, like, well, he's standing up and I'm sitting down, like, he's like, Garett, like, I'm like, yeah, he's like, you are absolutely terrible as a right winger. And I'm just like, okay, I've just spent 20 years of my life doing this. And he's like, you're absolutely terrible as a right winger. You should be a centerman. And I'm like, yes, okay. Like, in my head, I'm like, like, what the fuck? Like, this guy just told me my whole life of training is just, I'm terrible. And he's like, you need to be a centerman. I'm like, okay. And I went to centerman from then on. But the thing is, I didn't let that affect me. And the funny thing was, he was completely right. And then like the rest of my college playing days of hockey, I was a centerman. And even to this day, I'm a centerman. I was like, he was completely right. But, he said it in such an aggressive manner of like, you're shit. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm bad. Whereas the other people, they would have, it would have just broken them.
By the way, how did you make it work playing hockey and playing CS? How did you make that work?
It was a lot of the time I couldn't abide by other teams' rules in terms of like when their schedule was. So when I played for like DeadZone or Eco or whatever, like temporarily, they had their set schedules and it didn't work. And so a lot of them, I was very fortunate. This is going to sound cocky, but I was very fortunate that the teams that wanted me, when they wanted me, in the Canadian scene at the time, I was wanted. Like I was a desired
you're a good player. Yeah, you had skill.
Yeah, I was desired to the point where they were able to work around my schedule more. So they catered to it more. And then I did the best I could where sometimes I wouldn't go. I would actually skip practice for hockey. Right. In order, because if we had a match in Cal-I, fuck my practice. I'm just, but I still had training and everything. It wasn't like critical. Well, it was critical, but like I just did it. I just left. I just didn't do it. And yeah, but like I would do that selectively. Like if I had a Cal-I match day, like the next day, I'm like, all right, I'll skip practice today. I'll do the preparation with you guys, and then and I made it work. So it was tricky that way, and then it got to the point where then I eventually was the leader of all my teams, where I just was able to cater to my schedule. Right. And it was like, so that was the way I did it when I was playing hockey. But once the shoulder injury happened, it was at that point it was done. Even though I still played, I knew it was over. Right. And then I just focused on the Counter Strike, and that schedule took precedent over everything else.
Are you from Toronto? Where are you from in Canada?
Toronto. Yeah, Toronto.
Right. If people don't know, another thing this is why one of these days, I mean, I'm sort of doing it with these videos. They're almost like an oral history of CS, aren't they? But one of these days, I actually could write like an amazing book or like an article series about this. Because the other thing people don't know about North America is, so if people who already watch the CPLs know, like, yeah, there's Cal Invite or the CEVO, online leagues, right? But the online leagues were shit because you can imagine, how does a guy in New York play a guy in LA, and then you can imagine the guy in Texas in the middle is like, haha, and he's on 10 ping. It doesn't make sense, right? So what people didn't know was the actual place where you climbed the ladder was local scenes. And there was, famously, everyone knew it started in Texas. Then you had the West Coast ones. They had their own little lands where you win the $50, and unironically, some gangbanger guy might come and shoot you if you're the wrong team. That's a real thing. You had the New York ones, obviously, where they had their land centres. But people don't know, Toronto was a hub of all the Canadian CS teams. And actually, that was where the local lands would have all these teams you're talking in. Like, maybe an EG team wouldn't go, but some of the players probably go in a mixed team.
EG was the only was the only team that wouldn't go because
there you go. But I'm sure one or two of them come in a mixed team, and they, just so they can be cool if they lose. But essentially, these were like, when you're coming up, like you say, the first thing you try to do, like old school sports, is you try and conquer your region, right? You want to go to the Canadian lands at Toronto, and you want to be the best there and beat out those, whoever it might be, shaGuar in a mixed team, this guy from EG in a mixed team, the DeadZone guys. You're trying to battle to. You're trying to battle to show you're good, right?
Yeah, it's. But I remember they're called TFLs, Toronto Fun League, and they were held. I want to say I don't even remember.
It was pretty regularly.
Every 6 months.
Yeah,
it was every 3 months maybe. But like there was the point where it was the first prize was $1,000. I remember when I won my first one, I felt like I had so much money.
Sure.
But yeah, you'd go there and. The goal of being there as a player, and I was always again on American teams, right? So I hated the scene. I was always on American teams, but I would go as pugs to the event, and the goal
again, by the way, just like I said about the Canadians, people from New York could obviously drive up if they were like Americans, right? So you
there was always at least
players.
There's always at least one from New York.
Yes,
always at least one because. The scenes back then, it was like Toronto, then there was the New York scene, there was Texas with like, Eminem and those people. Yeah, and then obviously California. And like those were the main ones.
Yes.
Am I missing
Maybe Chicago might have had a little bit, but those are the main hubs,
Those are the main ones, and we held ours all the time, and it was a lot of fun. But I remember it was like above a pizza place, like
right.
like the size of an apartment where if you played your game, hot as hell, sweaty. When you're done, you had to wait hours before your next match, and I remember obviously 2D would like the main teams that would go in the Toronto version of it was like it was always 2D, DeadZone, Eco, or DV if depending on what year it was. And then whatever team Shag showed up with.
Yes. Basically, because if people don't know, because he was like the superstar. He walked in and he was like Ronaldo or something. Everyone was like, oh my God.
Shag was...
Yeah, of course.
Griff, when he was God.
He was,
when he walked in.
And he knew it as well, by the way. He would walk in with that swagger.
Oh, yeah. He catered to it. I love Griff.
It's why it makes so much sense he became this poker star now. It's just totally his personality. He's supposed to be a marquee name, isn't he? It's just who he is.
He was a diva. Like, I love him.
Yeah.
He was a diva.
He knows it.
But not in a bad way either, though. He wasn't an asshole diva.
Yeah.
He was always like he was a good diva. He knew that he was above you. You know what I mean? Like, but he wasn't a complete asshole. So I just remember, so like he would be there with whatever team he was. And the funny thing was, I remember. So again, when my first TFL, when I was just coming up and I didn't know much about it, I remember when Shag showed up because people were like whispering. Like, oh, fucking shaGuar's here now. Me being like, I wasn't one who gave a crap about who I was playing against. So like when so everyone's saying, oh, Griff, shaGuar's here. And I'm like, who the hell's that? And they're like, oh, he's like the best player or whatever. And I'm like, cool, whatever. I don't care. And then I remember my first story with him because I told him the story afterwards. My first matchup was against him.
Right.
In TFL. And I'm like, oh, we're playing this guy. And I remember vividly. It was on Dust 2. Back when we were playing up to 13, and I remember we played his team. I don't remember who it was. It was probably with Wombat and people like that, his normal friends. And I was playing with a team called Dance City Network. It was like it was a guy who actually ran the TFLs, but his company was Dance City. He was like a DJ, and he would we'd play for his teams. And I played his team, and I beat up this team hard, but we lost. And I remember Shag literally yelling, "Who the fuck does this guy think he is?"
Great, that's a great line.
And I didn't think much of it until I got older and I started realizing who he was. I'm like, oh, that was that's a compliment.
In a way, he's
that's a compliment. They beat us like 13-8 or 13-9, but I remember him saying that and people coming up to me like, "Yo, you were pissing Shag off," and I'm like, "Cool, great, right?" I was like, "Great, that's awesome." But I remember those LANs were. They were that was like the CPLs for Canadians, whereas like that was blood. You played for blood. You wanted to win so badly, and the shit talking and everything, and it was so much fun. I miss those. I wish we still did them, but a lot of the mindsets changed to if there's not enough money on the line, you're not going to go.
No.
And now, but back then it was just like I want to compete, and it was a fun weekend. Every time it was a fun weekend, but I miss those days. But yeah, that was You're just making me go through my, like, I'm just like,
well, what you're talking about
remember.
now, this is also why, in a way, actually the scene was, except for when it was just politics, like someone's friend and he can join the team. Except for that, there was a very pure way you made it in the scene, which is back then, no one was scouting or watching your demo. No one gave a fuck about that aspect. So what they would do is, it's like you're saying, what would happen is, here's how you get in a good team. You go to a LAN, you play their team. They might beat you, maybe you don't upset them, but you play great. And then they go, maybe this guy's got something. And then they give you a tryout when they kick the next guy, right? So when you're saying these names, Echo, Pernicious Violence, or whatever it was called, eventually DeadZone was obviously one of the bigger ones. Like, that is like climbing up the ladder. If I went back and I could pull up, it won't be online now, but if I could pull up a bracket from these tournaments, that would almost be like you're just going from better team to better team. And these are all teams you know when you go to the LANs, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. It literally was. It was a very gradual ladder that I was fortunate enough where I didn't have to spend too much time on one team.
Yes.
Before I went to the next one. I know it is because there was a contracts back then. Not until I joined EG. That was when that's when it became a contractual thing. But yeah, you did the climbing, and I remember like the day I said, "Fuck Canadian Counter-Strike." I'm pardon my language, but like I remember when I did it is because I went to a TFL, the LAN. I was playing with a team called. I don't remember what we called it. Men in Black or something like that,
nice.
Whatever it was.
Okay.
But it was a pug team of like online players, and I think we won. I don't remember. I think I had Blitz. It was an old Canadian player, Blitz, and a couple other people, and we won. And we beat DeadZone in the finals, which DeadZone won all the time, that event.
Yeah, sure.
They were like the LAN team. Even though everyone always bitched about them online about being cheaters, they always won the LAN. So like it was just the Americans couldn't get over it, but they always won the LAN. But we beat them, and then when that happened, then all the Canadian teams wanted me. Not EG, they're West Coast. They didn't give a shit. All the East Coast teams wanted me. East Coast events at 2D, and then at the time there was a team called RT who had Moofer. If you remember Moofer, and so they all wanted me, and then he was the team that. He offered me a computer, or their team offered me a computer. Okay. And back in the day, that meant so much.
Computers were also way more expensive back then, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. It was like $2,000 for a PC back then, wasn't it?
$2,000, yeah. And because I played online with 30 FPS.
Right.
So when I was playing with, Familia or PV online, 30 FPS in Cal-I, with 110 ping, which 110 ping back then compared to 110 ping now was a very big difference. And so where you had to change the way you played in order to have a chance. And when they offered me a computer and I said yes, I then found out they did that because they didn't want me to join the other teams.
Right.
So they waited until the other teams got their spots filled up. And then they didn't want to use me because they wanted to screw the other ones over. And I'm like, I'm out.
By the way, what was the vibe of that? Because as you say, it was a very cliquey thing in NA. Like maybe shaGuar was allowed to go elsewhere because he was the superstar and everyone knew he's better than us, right? But did people feel like you were a traitor because you went with the Americans?
Well, no, it wasn't. I basically decided to go with the Americans because, again, the teams were cliquey. 2D was a team where there was a local LAN center that. Where I started really truly liking Counter-Strike and just I played all my matches there. So whenever people thought I cheated online, I was on a LAN playing every time. But I was playing at the LAN center and that was 2D's home. That was where they always played, and I was always trying to befriend them and so on. I was doing my politicking, trying to they never let me in their team. Never. They was they had their friend group, the twin brothers, Jack and Mark and everything, and They had their group, and then DeadZone was their group. They had their people, and then Eco was their people. It was you couldn't get in. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to go the American route, and I went, and I had my own teams, and or GB or whatever, and I was trying to find my pathway in, and I did play for DeadZone and Eco. Eco was the only Canadian team that I joined, officially joined them, but then they ended up dying. Thrust and these other guys, they were done, where they end up dying, and I'm then that's when I was I'm done with this. American teams the rest of the way until eventually EG. But yeah, it was too cliquey. It was way too cliquey, and it was a huge turnoff. So I I relegated myself to just showing up with pugs and playing for fun and so on. But like my goal was to be on the American teams. I also felt that they were, at the time, they were more serious.
Yeah.
And I wanted to win. And also 2D and them, they were like Cal P at the time. So between Cal Maine and Cal I, they're Cal P, and I'm like, I don't want that.
By the way, one last thing about the Canadian scene, which is, wasn't there always a thing where for some reason, I don't know if this is something about Canadian politics, I don't understand, but I feel like all the teams that were specifically the French-Canadian ones, the Quebecois ones, everyone always thought they were onliners and cheaters for some reason. Wasn't that always like the weird vibe that was always going on?
I think that's still a thing.
Right, okay.
We always thought the French cheated.
Right.
But like they always had like their one team that would come down, and like they would never win, but they would always compete. But like it was like they were just who you teased and who you,
right.
But like there were a few Canadians that did cheat that were from Quebec, and then you labeled the whole.
Oh, see, right.
You labeled the whole province.
Sure.
But like, nah, they didn't actually.
Oh,
like,
fair enough.
The scene didn't cheat, but like there were a couple that did.
Okay.
But there were a couple in Toronto. Like,
yeah,
it was
of course.
A thing. Like,
no.
But that was just when you were kids back. Like you just made fun of the
No.
players.
It sounds like it's the equivalent of like every country has that thing where you say the neighbouring country, the ones that shag the sheep or whatever. You know that famous thing in like every other country. It's the same thing, I guess, in CS. Then
It's exactly that's exactly what it was. You know, the West Coast with EG, they're too elite for everyone. They're too bougie.
Okay.
You know, the French cheated, and then the Toronto scene was the real scene of Canada. Is what we felt.
Yeah. By the way, before we go on, for people who don't know, there was a little bit of playing in like obviously like British Columbia on the West Coast, Vancouver, etc. And they could obviously go down to the But if people don't know, this is why I always feel like it's a bit like you have to have the same thing about Australian CS. It's like if you're from Europe, understand Garett's not going across all of fucking Canada to the West Coast. Like remember. It's expensive back there, and it's fucking massive. Like, it's really massive, right?
It's like a 6-hour flight, and at the time, again, the flights are like thousands of dollars. It's like no, we didn't go to those ones. Like that was the one thing, guys. Like North American players were always pissed about when it came to like the Europeans always bragging about being better than us, which they were. If I want to debase it, they were. But like the fact that like the ping was always nice and low. There's events you can get to quicker. Like that, we were very jealous of that, right? We're like very jealous.
Sure.
We're like, and North America is very segmented. If you want to go to New York, like, we got to do this trip, right? Or and like cross the border and deal with all that crap. But it was a pain in the ass. But yeah, the Toronto was the hub for Canada where it was played, and then eventually the TFLs died out, and then that's when the LAN events stopped happening. That literally dispersed the scene. That's when the scene of Canada went downhill hard.
Yeah.
And then from then on, even till today, there's very rare you ever see a team that's all Canadian.
Almost never, yeah.
And that's why if we end up getting to it, that's one of the things I ended up coming back and doing years down the road because the scene was effectively dead.
Yeah, you need the grassroots. As I was saying, that's how you find the players. Yeah.
Yes, when the LAN stopped, the scene died.
Yes,
and then the best individual players stayed around.
Yes. By the way, what's funny is that's actually the secret to esports that people haven't realised of why a lot of the big games eventually do die out and get less. That's even why Sweden's not as good in CS anymore. If you went there, you can imagine there were all those LAN cafes, LANs all the time. That doesn't happen now. If you go into the LAN cafe there, the kids playing PUBG or Fortnite or some other League of Legends or some shit. You're not playing CS, so it doesn't come through. As you say, the first one you went to was that big CPL. It was the smaller one, but it was the CPL in summer in 2005 where you went with DeadZone. And even though look, if you go back, obviously, as you say, if you came 8th, but it was a watered-down CPL, it's not that mega. But I looked up, and you did beat Mug and Mouse, which is the Texas local team. You beat Green Berets, which is obviously the team you joined later. By the way, like, these players are all Cal Invite players. Green Berets probably in Cal Invite at the time. Like, these are, like, even to get a mini scalp like that's a big deal, right? And to be at the event.
Yeah.
To see us, to see these guys.
Yeah, that was a very fun first experience. Because, like, we got to beat some like... I don't want to say they were in Cal I. Okay, so I'm not gonna say. But
I bet they thought they were going to beat you, though. But they didn't expect to lose.
Because we were DeadZone. We were Canadian. We were online. We couldn't play on LAN, but we beat those teams. And the funny thing is, all the other events I went to, I don't remember them that well. I remember that one because it was the first one very well because we beat those teams. I remember we lost at JMC. When they were like, when Jax was Jax and like that, but we kept it close. And I remember we got this curb stomped by EG. And that was
but this was the EG that had shaGuar standing in, though, so it was a pretty fucking state.
Yeah,
so Stevens and shaGuar, it was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, mate.
And but I remember though, because it was the game I just determined I'm never playing with these guys again. Because
the DeadZone guys, right?
Because Talon loved the guy, but he was a leader of DeadZone. Where like you might remember this, but whenever people talked about DZing into a site, that meant going to a site with no flashes, nothing.
Right,
You would just
go and dry,
aim in, and like you would win that trade. Win the trade, you got the site. And like back then, we got made fun of all the time for that. But then when we got, now you see it all the time, and you're like, the shit was legit. Like that was actually a real thing. But back then, we got criticized for it. But it pissed me off, no belief. So he believed in rushing B. Right. That was one of his things. And we played T-Side Inferno against EG. I remember this vividly. This was not planned to talk about this, but like T-Side Inferno rushing B. We rushed B 14 out of 15 rounds.
Okay. Or was it a meat grind, I'm guessing?
Oh, or was it 12 rounds? Whatever it was. I don't remember which was the score. But like it was every round. And then we went A once. We won the round. We went back. We went back B every time after that, and then that was when I decided I'm leading. I'm not doing this shit anymore. So I never played for them again after that. but that was most. I remember that one very, very well. That was a very fond memories of that event.
Well, what's funny is now the one we referenced earlier, we can talk about because the CPL after that, the CPL Winter 2005 was
it the one right after?
Yeah, it was the one in the winter, which if you remember, this doesn't have any clash with these subsies. So this is one where it's like the true CPL again, which is like, sort of the World Championship and by the way, I can tell you, this was one of the most stacked events. This is where like, if you ever go and look, even like the top 16's good, mate. Like forget like the top
I remember.
And the key thing is, and so, no, you're thinking of the other one. That's the one, the group stage one was the year after. This is the one where it's just a bracket again.
Yes.
Are you ready? So this is the one where you went with the mix 50 cal and you had Pinecone, if anyone who's on ESEA, they know that guy. And it was just a bunch of Americans. But by the way, here's all you need to know. Most of these players never became anything. They were just like Cal Peak, low Cal high level.
Two of them didn't even play the game.
Oh, there you go. But basically, for me, I actually think this has to be one of the things that launched you because the key thing is this.
It was.
When you got this upset in the first round of the playoffs, this is actually one of those ones people have memory hold. That's when Rival, who, if you remember, before this is making all the thirds, all the CPLs, they're the best NA team at the time.
Third every CPL.
And what they did is, for this event, they'd taken some of those players like Keen from the other West Coast team, Death is Eternal, and they'd made like a super team of like all the... By the way, I can tell you, these were all insane players. Like, these are the people where they probably thought they were going to win this land, mate. And they went here, and you guys beat them in the first round, in the first fucking round of the tournament. And I can tell you, bro, I think after that tournament, that whole team just like collapsed and fell apart, and they all fucking killed each other. You know what I mean? Like, this has to be a super hype upset, mate. I bet this was insane. Like you say, you probably ruined the whole bracket.
So it was me, Pinecone, a Source player who was like the manager. I think if he ever watched this, I hope he doesn't get offended by this. But I think he was just a Source player who had money. Oh, okay. Like his family had money, or the company 50K. I don't know, whatever it was, right? But he was the one to ask me, like, I'll pay for you to go. Do you want to go? I'm like, sure. And then the other two guys, like one of them was a videographer or something. He didn't play the game. And then the other one, I think, played the game, but I don't think he like played it competitively. But at that time, I was on GB.
Oh, I see. Right.
So I was on GB, but James kept me as the 6. Okay. Right. So
if people don't know, he was one of the few people. We'll talk about it later, but he was one of the few people who was always trying to do some sort of like sports thing of like, I'm going to bring you up slowly. You got to earn. I'm going to teach you the game. He had kind of a very interesting personality, didn't he?
Yeah, very much so. So I was the rookie. I had to earn my stripes, right?
Okay. And then, but even though the joke, by the way, guys, is he was probably already the best player in the team. He just wasn't allowed on the lineup as the joke, right?
Yeah, no, I was. But the thing was, he had his lineup that they practiced with.
Oh,
for a long time.
Right.
So he's like, he wanted to play the event with the team he played with.
Makes sense.
I'm like, I get it, whatever, sure. So, I don't remember if I was upset. I don't remember. But I just went to this event because I wanted to have fun. I wanted to show up, be there, and then. Yeah, I remember going to that matchup, and even though it was against Rival and we the chance of us winning was like next to none. I did take it seriously, and I know those guys. I ended up playing with them. They for 100% didn't take it seriously. So I remembered. I watched the demos of them because we knew the map because the maps are predetermined.
Right. Yeah.
I knew what map we were playing, so I watched demos of them, and I made a plan. And I basically told my guys. I remember. I told them like, if we win pistol and we can control their money, we can win this. And like they didn't believe me, but then we ended up winning pistol, and then we kept. And then I remember vividly the strategy. I'm like, we're gonna keep this so simple. All we gotta do is like just control the money, keep it simple. So when they're, on their first buy, when we can break them again, I'm like, I'm just gonna keep it simple. We're gonna go B, and you're just gonna let me lead because the whole thing was let me go, right? Let me go. I will lead in there. You guys can execute. I'll go in and I'll mop them up. I'll kill them. I'll get us in. And when we get in, we just sit in your spots and just stay there. Like it was very, very dictatorship almost the way I did it, but not with Pinecone because I let him do his thing because it was Pinecone. At least he played the game, and I just remember doing that, and we just crippled their money, and then they couldn't rebound. They couldn't get the money back, and then when they went around, we killed a lot of them, and then I just kept it simple, and we beat them, and they were just there's still a video I think on YouTube about it, right, where like you can see the handshakes where. Like Mark Masanook is like he gives me like the limp the camera like the limp hand whatever they wrapping up the just not looking at us pissed off, and I remember the weight of it didn't hit me until I remember Laurie Pasha from EG. So EG being like the Canadian gods of Counter-Strike, right? Like he came out to me and is like, "Did you just beat Rival?" And like he couldn't believe it. He was like, "You played fucking amazing, man." I'm like thanks, cool. And I was just like, all right, great. But like it didn't really hit me until probably a couple hours later when like people kept talking about it. But like that was when people started saying like who the hell is this Garett guy? Sure. Because in the CPL before it, I remember like back then like this is how we judge things. It was like got frag rating, I think it was, or whatever. I think I was like third in all of the CPL. And then this CPL, I was like third or fourth or fifth, whatever it was. I was high up there again. And then people noticed me. And then James was like, "Yep, you're starting on the team now, going forward."
Perfect.
To the point where my favorite story of all this, though, that people don't notice besides was when I officially was on GB and we went back to play Cal-I back online. The first match of the season was against Rival.
Oh, perfect.
And we played Comrade, right?
Oh, which was like a custom map at the time. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was like the second season using it or the first one, whatever it was.
Sure.
So the very first match of Cal-I was against Comrade. So it was on Comrade against Rival, and we were playing CT side. And the very first pistol round, I aced them. It's in like a clip on like a movie that's on YouTube of a guy that made it me. I aced them in the very first round, and then James and the people on GB started talking crap about them because it was like. Your first round back after being beat by this guy on LAN with a crap team, and he aces you. And then it was just like, and then we end up beating him as well. And it was like, that would like started the end of that team. They started imploding after that one. But then they made Pandemic down the road. But yeah, that was, by the way, a wild event.
Obviously, if you can tell me if you remember any of the things about specific matches, you don't have to go into the detail. But I did see that because you won this game, and you were on the top part of the bracket. You actually, after that, played before he was in Fnatic, Forrest's team, which was Begrip at the time from Sweden, and they mega smashed you. Understandably, it was like Forrest and Rob.
On
what was that like? That sounds wild.
That one I had no delusions we were gonna win.
All right,
okay. Like I knew we were gonna lose Rival, but like there was that like 0.1%.
Okay.
But when we played Begrip, I was like, I knew it wasn't gonna happen as soon as I found out we were starting T-side Cobble. So I'm like T-side Cobble with people that don't play the game.
I'm like, you can get 15-0. Yeah,
we're doomed. And I think we got one round. Or did we get sweep? I don't know. I don't remember. But like,
I think it was a sweep.
It was a sweep. Yeah, we got T-side Cobble, and I'm like, guys, it was nice. It was worth a shot, right? And then we played. I think we played another European.
We played in the Norwegian one with BSL Catch Gamer.
Yeah, and like we actually got some rounds. Yeah, we got some. That was on Inferno again, I think. We got some rounds in that one, but the Cobble one I knew was when I saw that T-Side call, I'm like, guys, I'm like, we can't do this. Like, that was back when if you won a round, it was like, congratulations, you have a shot.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's all I remember about that. I remember hiding up in the tower on CT Cobble and Pistol Round, telling the rest of my team, go B. Just pray to God,
Sure.
you guys can hold B. I'll do A. Just hold B. And I don't remember what they did, but we lost the round.
Like I say, though, that's one of the ways back then that you could get yourself on the map, as it were, right? I would ask you this. I actually have a very good memory because I used to watch all the POVs on Gotfrag when they used to come out.
Yeah.
Right?
I wish I still had those, man.
You were one of those people. I'm going to get, like, first of all, did you have, like, a higher sensitivity? Because I always thought you had, like, a pretty good AK, but you looked like you had that sort of shaky spray a little bit.
No, that's actually funny that you say it because you're going to be shocked. I had the lowest sensitivity.
Wow. Okay.
So I was an arm player. I didn't do wrist. I did full arm movements. So when I got to Cal-I and the higher levels, I had to force myself to raise it because I was having trouble dodging flashes because you're playing against better teams and they knew what they were doing. So at the time I used like an MX300 mouse.
Classic mouse, by the way.
Yeah, that was.
I've still got the mouse. That's that shell right now. They still make it on Logic, the G1. Yeah, I love it, mate.
That was my baby, right?
Best.
So I had that one, and my sensitivity was 1.3.
Pretty low.
And like to the point where like if I went side to side on like the DKT mouse pad, the big mouse
massive
pad,
one, yeah.
If I went side to side, I barely would hit 180 degrees.
Okay.
So like it was so. If you saw me shaking, it was probably because I'm fucking moving my arms. So you know what I mean? I don't know what it was, but it was it was a low sensitivity. And then like when I played Source, I had to force myself to raise it again because the flashes in that game were crazier. So like I had to force myself, but I never got to like a very high sensitivity.
Right.
I still to this day can't do it. I've tried. I found that the margin of error was too small.
Yeah.
Like if I went like a little tick too far, I would miss my op shot. And I'm like, well, I can't do this.
So as you say, obviously you were in Green Berets at the time, and we have to talk about James at this point in time because he basically was Green Berets. And as I said, here's what's funny. A lot of people will remember if they were a forum person back then, he used to actually get ridiculed a lot because obviously when stats existed, he had very bad stats. He wasn't like a super skilled player. But also he used to do that thing where there was like demos where it was like him teaching someone the game, like now you're going to shoot spray. And even though everyone memed on him, I actually always used to say this, which is, look, yes, maybe he actually thinks he's better than he is, or, you know, he has some grand idea. But in a way, that's actually what you sort of want from a leader. Like you said about the other guy from DeadZone. You don't want the guy who just calls it, just go to the site or whatever. You want actually the guy who almost thinks he's like a fucking NFL coach. Like, we're going to do this, guys, and in the practice do the dry run. Like, there were clearly positives. And by the way, he did bring through quite a few talented players. So even though people could meme on him, I could see the positives. There was something there.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. There's a couple of people, like on East Coast Offense, there's a guy named Nova, who's like, I always called the Canadian version of James because he was very like meticulous about like the strategies and like what we're doing. Like we when we were on the team, we practice in a server. I don't remember even scrimming.
Right.
I honestly don't. I just remember being in a server, just going over. If this happens, we're doing this. Like just being like as basically as a team as much as you possibly could. He was very much like that, but he always wanted to teach the individual players, help them get better. He was very much a teacher, right? Which, you know, when we played matches, he was always thinking about the strategies and like what everyone's doing, that he couldn't actually focus on playing himself, right? So he never just could like, you know, let loose and just play. But he always said that when when he was able to play a lot better, when the GB was at his best, was when I was on his team because I led the opposite side of the map. So he was doing his thing. He would call the main thing. I was like the secondary caller. He would call whatever he wanted to do. I would go to the opposite side and I would, you know, basically handcraft that, you know, on the fly as we were seeing what was happening. And then when we were doing that, then we were able to come together and he'd make the final call. He was very great at helping the people come up because he was one of the few people in the scene because it was very cliquey, like you mentioned, right? Where it was always about having, you know, your friends and so, you know, and also he plucked people from like Calmaine or Calp and so on, and they all eventually left him, because they wanted to go to other teams and whatnot. But like few of them stayed, like Lucky Ted stayed, Mailer stayed. Like he had his core group, but like that fourth or fifth person always ended up leaving because they wanted to, you know, I wanted to go to well, I quit because of the hockey thing. He thinks I just left them, but I quit because of the hockey thing. But the goal, was always to move on up. But GB was always stuck in this level of being really like being a Kali, always competing, but never,
Yes.
never like at the top competing, right? But what he was able to teach and like how he made me think, like a lot of those things, even to this day, I still use, and even in a day-to-day life, I still use it. But he was critical in, being the first American team that I joined, like really, well, I got to like get into Kali, have an American team, was able to play and like get my name out there, and I was able to beat up like 3D and stuff whenever we played him, and we got wins against top teams, which GB normally never got.
Yeah.
So like it was critical for like my process of where I went. Like it was if I didn't have GB and James teaching me, it would have slowed down. I believe I would have got where I would have been, but it would have been slower, and I might have not nearly. I might not have been as good. Like
Yes.
he was critical in getting me to break out of like my, if I was one dimensional, he made me two dimensional, right? And then as I went on down the road, down the teams, and I got three dimensional, and I kept going and evolving as a player. But he gave me a platform to like, all right, it's time to like, I don't need to lead anymore. It's time to dance. I can just go out there and kill people, right? Well, I was still like secondary leading, but like I didn't have to do like everything. So it was very important.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadju, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.